So it is now our great pleasure and honor to introduce our first provocation speaker today, Sandra Niessen. Sandra is an anthropologist and activist who's repeatedly called out both the global Western fashion industry for its imperialism, but also fashion studies for its biases and othering. Using her decades of fieldwork among the Batak in Indonesia to ground her increasingly direct critique, she recently published a manifesto for degrowth, which urges a process of defashion. And we took up this provocative term from her to frame this conference, and we're very honored to welcome you here today, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Renata, and what an honor to be here today. Wow. Isn't this just the most amazing conference? I'm so excited about being here. I've never experienced anything like this. So creative, so innovative, so dynamic, so diverse. And I get to open it, which is amazing. Let's see. I'd like to go here first. So here we are. No, this is the old one. This is
Don't worry.
the only one you have. Okay.
This was the one till July, and now we are here.
Okay. Super. So we're not here. We're elsewhere. But we can pretend we're there. Yeah, so then we'll go back. I have to figure out how to deal with my visuals here, because if I can see my paper, I can't see you, and if I can see you, I can't see my paper. I'm going to choose for my paper. I would like to offer some insights into this defashion journey that I have taken with Fashion Act Now. Fashion Act Now is that activist group that I belong to with its headquarters in the UK. I'm really thrilled that so many, can you put up your hands? Everybody from Fashion Act Now who's a member, put up your hands. You can see that we're really well represented. I'm sorry, there's this thing, I can't see you so well. Yeah, so if I'm given the honor of having created this term, defashion, then I have to share it because it has emerged from conversations, very deep-going, exciting conversations that I've had with Fashion Act Now, that we've had together for all the Corona years and all that time trying to figure out what we can do about fashion because it's in doing the wrong thing. I wrote the manifesto of defashion, and I'm not going to repeat that today. I'm hoping to say some new things. And so I'm going to launch right into it. But before I do, I also want to say that I'm wearing today a kabaya, an Indonesian blouse, and an ulos to acknowledge the role of the Batak people in shaping my thinking. I've been going back and forth between Indonesia and the Northern Nations, whether it was Canada or the Netherlands, for 45 years. And it's been that juxtaposition of being there and being here that has really shaped so much of my thinking. Okay. Here we definitely are. This is a very scary graph. It shows us what's been happening for the last 800,000 years in terms of CO2 and temperature. We are now in global boiling, according to Guterres, but you can see how much higher the CO2 is in the air, and you can see how temperature and CO2 always match. So you can also see what we can expect in terms of temperature given the extremes of CO2 that we're currently experiencing. We will soon breach the 1.5 degree threshold that nations agreed upon in Paris. We're undergoing the sixth mass extinction. Many scientists predict that civilization will go into irreversible collapse within a decade. Some people say optimistically 3 decades. In other words, we have a very small window if we want to shape our future in good ways. Here we see fossil fuel use through time. This is about the last 200 years. On the left-hand side, fossil fuel. On the right-hand side, we see the Great Acceleration starting around 1950. This really talks about, in this particular case, you can't read it, I don't think, unless you're sitting really close to the front. But we're seeing that the hockey stick curve, that the exponential curve that we see with fossil fuels is matched in the areas of world population, GDP, primary energy use, fertilizer consumption, transportation, telecommunications, on, as well as goods and services. And you can bet your booties that it also applies to fashion. In other words, the normal, we are there, the normal that we experience in our daily lives is anything but normal in terms of the history of the world, in terms of our physical environment, in terms of our consumption of goods, in terms of waste and energy use. So we've got fuel, technology, and material completely enmeshed. Now, we know that some scholars lately have been talking about fossil fashion or fossil fuel fashion, and they're referring to plastic in our clothing, and they're referring also to fast fashion, which guzzles a lot of energy. But I think that this graph shows us that, in fact, industrial fashion has taken place during the fossil fuel age, starting 200 years ago. And I would therefore use the term fossil fuel fashion for this entire 200-year trajectory. I don't know if you agree with me. We can talk about that. Lately, I've been very impressed by a series of podcasts by Nate Hagens, and he claims that we are energy blind. And this has been a eureka moment for me, because I've been trying to, for me, it's realizing that I've been so energy blind has taught me that energy has been the elephant in the industry, in the middle of the room. All fashion forms since the Industrial Revolution have been facilitated and enabled by fossil fuels. And if we look at that period of the Great Acceleration, then we know that the democratization of fashion, the globalization of fashion, and now fast fashion are all expressions of fossil fuel enablement and stages of increased fossil fuel use in fashion. The fossil fuel era is the industrial fashion era. Fossil fuel fashion is all that you and I know. We don't know anything else but. And you might say, so what? We've always known that the fashion industry, just like every other industry, is powered by fossil fuels. But I think I'm saying something more than that. I think it raises the question, what is Western fashion without fossil fuels? And I think the answer is, it doesn't exist. Western fashion, industrial fashion, is fossil fuel fashion. And I think the fact that we don't even discuss it in our curricula means that we're energy blind. It's a demonstration of our blindness. Case in point. A century ago, fashion scholars characterized Western fashion as having rapid change of styles relative to traditional and tribal clothing. And they attributed that to the superiority of Western civilization and not to fossil fuels. So fashion has henceforth been used to express cultural superiority when it was fossil fuels that enabled faster technologies and expanded the throughput of materials. I find that a very interesting observation. And this raises the question, is the othering that is endemic to industrial fashion a delusion of fossil fuel enablement? Othering has been part of the very definition of industrial fashion. The West has it, the rest does not. You might know that in my publications. I've been on about that since about 2003. The entire world continues to suffer from this vertical binary. Call it colonial thought patterns. It is carried over into policies and politics, and it's evident from the treatment of refugees and immigrants and people of color, especially in the West. Also, our economic institutions, the international ones, IMF, and so on. Recent publications discuss othering as endemic to the fossil fuel industry as well, from the lowest echelons to the highest echelons, evidenced in racism, white supremacy, to oligarchy and dictatorship. I'm going to go out on a limb for a minute here because I haven't done research in this area, but it's just, I've been very struck by that energy blindness, and I want to raise an issue that I think should be explored. How far does the mutualism between fashion and the fossil fuel industry extend? We know that we have to take the plastic out of clothing and use different sources of power. This relates to the physicality of fashion. But are there thought systems in fashion, such as othering, that have been engendered by fossil fuels? And does that mean that getting off fossil fuels in fashion means changing our thinking as well, getting through those myths? Fashion is arguably the most potent tool to enable and normalize othering. Fashion also exalts othering. Think of how it showcases othering in association with mythologies of superiority and the good life. Lifestyles of, let's face it, high fossil fuel consumption, big yachts, cruises, billionaire and oligarchic culture, fancy vacations, fancy homes, and so on. Fashion promotes fossil fuel consumption. Fossil fuels enable fashion production. Nice, hand in hand. They're working together, I think. If there is this enmeshment of fossil fuels and fashion in our conceptual world, then getting off fossil fuel fashions is about changing our thinking. And it won't be enough to just take the plastic out of our clothes and stop using fossil fuels if we use other power sources like we've been using fossil fuels. It means there needs to be a change of mindset. I predict that the exploration of the relationship between fossil fuels and the industrial fashion system will entail or require a rewriting of fashion history, because so far our fashion history books do not talk about the role of energy. So now, a word about exponential growth. In 1972, the authors of The Limits to Growth, you may have read that, explained its significance very powerfully in the form of a French riddle, and I'd like to share that with you because I think it's incredible. Suppose you own a lily pond, and you have a little water lily growing in there, one, and the lily plant doubles every day, and you know that if the lily grows unchecked, it will completely cover the pond in 30 days and choke out all other forms of life. And you decide the lily is so pretty, you're going to start weeding out the lily when the pond is half full of the lily. What day will that be? That's right. It'll be the 29th day. And that's because it doubles every day. So on the 30th day, it will fill the pond. You have one day to clean up your lily pond. Now, that means that you and I, we are here. We are now in the 29th day. Our pond is at least half full. And how do we know that? Because scientists tell us if we were to grow the global economy at 3% a year, as most governments and institutions expect and desire and encourage, we would use as much energy and materials in the next 30 years as we have in the past 10,000 years. This is a fact that changes one's life. And that means that we're at the top of the curve, because we can't go much higher. So this is a call to arms. I call on all of you here present and your students to head into this conference with the intention of making this moment the most significant inflection point in the history of fashion, to bend the fashion curve. Because we're living the 29th day. We have that job. We have to give it our all, because when the pond is filled with lily pads, all other forms of fashion will die. And life as well. The exponential curve shows that the unprecedented urgency of our time requires us to make this a time of unprecedented agency. So this little graph tells us my vision, our vision of defashion, how I perceive our task. Very simple and clear. The upward slope is fossil fuel fashion. It's based on growth. It's based on exploitation. It creates sacrifice zones, destroys ecosystems and indigenous cultures. It's corrupted by that requirement to grow at any cost. It's degenerative by its very nature, and it functions as a handmaiden of the fossil fuel economy. And it ends there. And that's where defashion begins and where we begin with our agency. We make sure that that all stops. No more growth, no more fossil fuels in fashion, and so on. Defashion is freeing ourselves and the planet of big fashion and the capital F variety based on fossil fuels growth and exploitation. So then you say, ooh, does that mean the end of beautiful clothing? Does it mean painful sobriety? Does it mean doing without? And the answer is no. Sorry. Very blunt. And why? And that's because it's absolutely critical to make a distinction between big F fashion, capital F fashion, what we know industrial fashion, and little f fashion. This is not a spelling error here. Little f fashion. What is little f fashion? Little f fashion is what we're all hardwired to have. It's a human universal. It means that there is no people at any time or any place in the history of this planet that has not had a clothing system. And if we do without this big F variant, that means that we've given space in our pond to all other forms of fashion. And for us then at Fashion Act Now, very much defashion has to do with creating space, nurturing, and so on, the small f variety. And I'm going to develop that a little bit further today, but a word first to educators and students. It's our job to teach about small f fashion, the human universal. It is our job to be small f fashion apologists and not supporters of the industry. It's no longer our job to save the fossil fuel fashion industry or to make the fashion industry sustainable. It is not fair to expect students to repair the mess that the industry got us into. Let students unleash their creativity on regenerative systems, small f fashion, to eclipse and not correct the big F variant. Dress has always been about nurturing, protecting, and the beautiful, unless it gets co-opted by big business and thrives on fossil fuels, sacrifice zones, and othering. So let's teach about fashion that is not co-opted by big business, and let's redo our curricula, making them defashion curricula. That's why this is called a provocation, by the way. So aren't we doing this already by working on sustainability? Whoa, 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 what is she talking about up there behind the microphone? We're doing so much already to reduce energy use, reduce toxins, reduce waste, to introduce circularity and innovation, to facilitate material reductions. I'm the last person in this room to doubt the importance of the great strides that are being made. However, for whom are these strategies? Are we continuing to work on and for big F fashion? That means that we're continuing to erode small f fashion. It's losing its space in the pond. Secondly, are these strategies working? No. They're failing to bend that exponential curve that just keeps going up. More toxicity, more CO2, record highs, exploitation, still more the rule than the exception, fast fashion industry still planning for greater growth, the use of fossil fuels still expanding, and therefore, another provocation. Even the bona fide governmental rubber-stamped sustainability framework is in fact greenwashing, because it's not giving us what we need. Think of organic cotton grown on a plantation that destroyed rainforest. Think of an organic cotton t-shirt made of slave labor, selected because it was organic cotton. Think of an embroidered cotton t-shirt made by indigenous embroiderers who therefore had no time to invest in their own clothing culture. Think of plastic bottles recycled to make embroidery yarn, whereby the plastic is taken out of a circular system and put into a linear system. Think of Patagonia that uses forever chemicals to make your rainwear water resistant. Think of a sustainable line that booms and grows, and on and on. And so, provocation, I argue that the sustainable fossil fuel fashion is an oxymoron. Oxymoron means a contradiction in terms. It contains its own contradiction. Sustainable fashion, fossil fuel fashion, is an oxymoron because it's flawed in its core. It's based on growth and fossil fuels. Sustainability focused on reforming the flawed industry will not have the desired results, because when you build atop a skewed foundation, the structure above it will also be skewed. We need transformation. We need to change the foundation, and defashion is about co-creating a new foundation. The word defashion arose spontaneously, as I've said, during discussions with Fashion Act Now. We were frustrated and we were disappointed. We tried to talk together, and the words we used, like even the basic words like sustainability and fashion, were co-opted by the industry, and so we didn't know how to communicate amongst ourselves without developing a new vocabulary and continually describing what I mean by that is. And so, our first awareness is that to dismantle big F fashion industry and build alternatives, we also needed to build new frames of thought and vocabularies. And that's when the real work began. So we together will be working on what does defashion mean, hopefully in the next 2 days. What is essentially non-fossil fuel fashion? It's a huge question. If current fossil fuel fashion is the starting point on the defashion map, where is defashion heading? Defashion is certainly getting off fossil fuels physically and conceptually, but what directions does it go in? It has to be low energy, maybe carbon sequestering, and so on. But I think, and this is where Fashion Act Now is putting its efforts, we believe that the key is to allow cultural diversity to flourish and to stop being sacrificed and to heal. We want room in the lily pond for other cultural expressions as diverse as possible. Fashion Act Now is putting its effort there and building up what it's calling our common market. And Sarah Arnold is here, and the Fashion Act Now members are here, and we can talk about that with you. We'd love to. The pluriverse of fashion reflects the universal propensity, our innate human tendency to dress and adorn. It has yielded through time and space incredible diversity of dress forms and systems, and we need to nurture that. We need all of you on board to accomplish that gargantuan task. We need to de-erase the systems that have been erased by big fashion. We have to learn how they have been eroded, how they've been destroyed by othering. We have to honor them, share knowledge with them, about them, with our students, engage with them in a positive way, encourage and facilitate, regenerate on their own terms. Enabling a pluriverse of fashion is both the means and the goal of defashion. The pluriverse is the way. So that means that you and I can start defashioning right now. Defashioning, therefore, will not and cannot be singular. It is about diversity. And may that be an empowering thought. It is also a thought that means that we all have to shoulder responsibility to bear it. So, I'll go back. Let's do defashion right. Let's work on this because at the very least it creates resilience in the face of the crises that we'll be facing very soon. I'd like to close by offering two pieces of advice. The first is, we are the pluriverse. The pluriverse, and Renata has already said it today, we are the pluriverse. The pluriverse is about relationships. Designing has to be about relationships, not just about clothing. That's very key to you designers. It has to be about inclusiveness. All voices must be respected and valued. It has to be horizontal in that way. It has to be about the end of othering and sacrifice. It can't be vertical. Fans' processes have always been collaborative, many-layered, many-faceted, horizontal, participatory, bottom-up, and they take achingly huge amounts of time, but that's what it's all about, getting everybody on board. It's about decoloniality. There can be no central dominant fashion force that guides the whole. It has to be a radical departure from the fashion system that ensures and perpetuates a colonial hierarchy. It has to be open. We must insist on keeping the avenues for local visions, local thinking, and local strategies open, and that's why I'm so excited to be at this conference, because I see that you, the triumvirate here at the head, have done so much to ensure openness about process and having every voice heard, and I really commend you for that. Second piece of advice is beware the myths. I already talked about this notion of Western superiority when all the while it was fossil fuels. They just stole the credit, right? And decided to use that as a pedestal to put themselves higher than everybody else. I've mentioned that the Western ego is wrapped up in deluding ourselves, and we have to watch out for those mythologies that we've constructed around our fashion system as we move into defashion. I've started to write a list of what I think are those mythologies and illusions, and they've been posted on the Fashion Act Now website. If you'd like to look them up, I hope to make that interactive, and if you have other ideas, contradictions, or additions, we're thrilled to hear about them. So this is, in essence, the summary of what I've said. Do I have 3 more minutes? Yes? Because I'd like to summarize what I've said about defashion. Friends, do you see defashion as contraction, frustration, disappointment, no satisfaction? Tightening a belt that already feels too tight for a feel-good future, that just doesn't seem right. I beg of you to change your lens, to see beyond enticing brands, to the industry failing to meet your demands, destroying our planet, then turning a blind eye, seducing, brainwashing, only to deny, hiding behind a succession of styles, contributing to waste for miles and miles, sacrificing us all when we buy in to seasons and sales and professional design, to hate our bodies, lose touch with our community, with our sheep and our flax and our creative capacity, offered freely by nature, erased with impunity. The top of the curve is our lowest point. Humanity flattened by the consumer role, dress of the other eroded, to say naught of our soul. The awful potential of the exponential to destroy for a fistful of money, dominance, and control. Civilizations implode and climates boil. Trapped by debt, millions sweat and toil. Industrial fashion, you are toxic. To all that walks, swims, flies, and thinks, carbon sinks are of no avail if your coloniality will prevail. Fashion mirror in our dress, reflecting sadly who we have come to be, though kindliness is what we want to see. Regeneration, reparation, sustainability, a healthy world, not our current distress. The top of the curve is our lowest point. Dear friends, we're gathered here to defashion education and the entire system, to reweave healing in our clothes, community in every stitch, repairing the tears of sacrifice, mending, reusing microfibers of hope in our heart, relearning the art of universal fashion to refuse to exploit. When we fail to give the other room, we prepare our own doom. Here, dear friends in Berlin, we embrace all as our family and thus reclaim our humanity. The top of the curve is our lowest point, whence we embark on defashion. Let us here, now, be the point of inflection, marking the start of the great resuscitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you for reminding us for the urgency, reminding us for all these blind spots that we have, all the blindness. And I'm looking forward to really chat with you and imagine how we would really look like without Western dress. I think this is a very nice design task. Industrial Western dress, of course. We will now, or if you want to know a bit more about Sandra, then all of you are invited to listen to the latest podcast series where Fashion is a Great Teacher talked to her about